Tonight's speakers, both Roger Miller and Gail Halvorson, are part of a teacher conference that's going on this week, a week-long conference that's sponsored by the Truman Library Institute. We have 35 teachers here from 10 different states as part of that program, and they're all here in the audience tonight. We are very grateful for the support of the Truman Library Institute, who provided the funding for tonight's program and for the Teachers Conference. And as an aside, as you leave tonight, there'll be some candy provided. Very thematic gift as you leave, and that is provided courtesy of Russell Stovers, and we're very grateful for that donation. Well, Truman Library Institute maybe should have got a louder applause than Russell Stovers, but that's okay. Candy, wins hearts and minds, right, Gail? Okay. No. That's it. I'm eating no more candy tonight. Our two speakers, Roger Miller and Gail Halvorson. Roger is the senior historian at the Air Force Studies Office. He's the author of To Save a City, The Berlin Airlift, 1948 to 1949. And both speakers are going to be available to sign books at the end of the program. Roger got his BA and MA in history at North Texas State University and his PhD at Indiana University. We're very glad to have Roger with us. Gail Halvorson, who you've already met briefly, was born on October 10th, 1920 in Salt Lake City. He mentioned this morning to our teachers that he grew up in small farms in Utah and Idaho, and he earned his private pilot license in September of 1941. He joined the U.S. Army Air Corps in June of 1942, and during World War II was assigned flight duty in the South Atlantic Theater. We know him best for the Berlin Airlift of 1948 when he became the Berlin Candy Bomber, and that's the theme of our program tonight. But since then, from 1952 to 1970, he was assigned research and development duties with the Air Force Systems Command. And in 1958, he was with the Air Force Space Program, and the Titan III space launch was one of his special projects. Gail eventually retired from the Air Force in September 1974, but he continues to fly. And in 1994, he participated in a food resupply drop over Bosnia. In 1999, he flew with a supply run to Albania to a Kosovo refugee camp. And in December 2000, he flew on the Christmas drop to 7 Micronesian islands. And then just last month, he retraced his 1948 flight plan over Berlin. Very impressive. So welcome both speakers. The format for tonight is that, first of all, Roger Miller is going to address the audience, and then we'll have Gail Halvorson, and then we'll have question and answers. We have a microphone set up for questions and answers because we are recording the program tonight, and that will help us hear the questions when you ask them. So I'm going to turn the program over to Roger Miller, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you. Good evening. This is impressive. Didn't know what to expect tonight, but we're sure happy that y'all could come down and listen to us, and particularly listen to Gail Halvorson. I'm going to start out. This is a painting that I used to illustrate the Berlin Airlift. This is of refueling the C-54s early one morning in Germany. I usually don't advertise it, but I've been studying oil painting in the torpedo factory down in Alexandria, Virginia, and this was the first painting I ever had at a juried international exhibition. But isn't that neat? Yeah. Yeah. But it illustrates the kind of mourning that appeared in Germany to a lot of young men who were doing a sterling job of presenting an opportunity for freedom and a future to about 2.3 million German citizens. I'm going to kind of try and keep the first part of this a little bit shorter than I would normally do. The Berlin crisis of 1948 came out of the solutions that ended World War II. The basic problem was simply what to do with Germany. To the leaders of the free world, Germany had plunged the world into war twice in that generation. Wars that cost millions in lives, billions in dollars, had destroyed nations, destroyed governments, brought up new governments, was considered a very militarist, hostile nation. What to do with it? In addition, in the 1930s, Germany had adopted a system of government that is perhaps the most pernicious system of government that mankind has ever inflicted upon itself. And so the other job was to get rid of Nazism. And in fact, the basic decision was to occupy Germany after the war and administer it. And there was a 3D policy, what I call the 3Ds: denazification, demilitarization, and democratization. The three major powers divided Germany into occupation zones, and they followed essentially the pattern of where the armies ended at the end of the war. The Soviets came from the east. They got the eastern zone. The British and the Americans came from the west. The British to the north, the Americans to the south. So we got the British zone to the north, the American zone to the south. And this was not a equal division of Germany, because basically this was the agricultural area, that was the industrial area, and the saying went out that the Russians got the food, the British got the industry, and the Americans got the scenery. The American and British divided a section out of their zone and created a fourth zone for France, and so there was a four-power Allied Control Council that administered all of Germany. And this is really one of the most important keys to the whole thing. Germany was not divided. The occupation zones were separate, but Germany was to be administered as a whole, as an economic whole and as a political whole. And that was the purpose of the Control Council. Now, let's see. We'll try this. There we go. The each of the sections had a military governor. In this case, on the far left is General Lucius Clay. And he was a courtly Southerner, noted for his extremely incisive mind and his extremely tough personality. He did not give an inch to anyone. The man next to him is Colonel Frank Howley, and this was one of the peculiarities of the occupation. The capital of Berlin, the capital of Germany, Berlin, ended up way over in the eastern zone, the eastern occupation zone under the Soviet control. Now, Berlin was divided into occupation sectors, and Howley was the famous commander of the American sector in Berlin. And he was an ex-cavalryman, very tough fighter who loved to bedevil the Soviets. There's a story about how they had the dinner for the four commandants in Berlin, and the Russian visitor complained about how tough the chicken was, and Howley fired back, "Of course it is. It had to fly all the way from the Western occupation zones." Yeah. But he found out that Marshal Sokolovsky, the Soviet leader, the Soviet governor, was in a house that was heated by gas pipes that came through the western sector. So he shut off the heat to the marshal's house, forcing him to move. And when his minions carried all this furniture and put it on a truck and tried to drive it across the western occupation area, sector, Howley's men were waiting and confiscated it. So had a lot of fun. He had a lot of fun. He was a good sense of humor. Yeah. But speaking of humor, the American military commander at the in USAFE, the American air commander of USAFE, United States Air Forces in Europe, was a jovial gentleman by the name of Curtis LeMay. And we're very fortunate. You don't find very many pictures of LeMay in a very happy mood. We got one. LeMay was another very tough combat veteran and really a brilliant, incisive individual. And he contributed greatly to the rise of the airlift. You know. The airlift, I'll stop right here and say the airlift came about basically because the Germans, the Soviets decided to halt deliveries of any foods, materials, and so forth between the Allied sectors in Berlin and the Western occupation zones. It's shifted. They halted this on the 24th of June, and basically they didn't declare a blockade. What they said was that there is a bridge repairs on this bridge over the Elbe River, and there will be no communications until future notice. This halted everything and basically ended up cutting off 2.3 million Berliners from any kind of food or support from the Western occupation zones. The Americans turned almost instantly, and the British, I should say, turned almost instantly to airlift, which they had developed during the Second World War. It was a real revolution in military air transport and military air power during the war, and that was the advent of global air logistics, global air transport. And we started flying stuff that no one ever imagined. You didn't deliver stuff by airplane. You delivered it by truck or by train or by ship, taking sometimes months to get wherever it was supposed to go. And the airlift by airplane promised immediate support, immediate supplies. And we developed that to a great extent during World War II. And we had two organizations ready to go at the beginning of the Berlin airlift. One was that of the troop carrier groups. Troop carrier was designed for airborne units, and these were combat units, and were assigned to the theater commanders. So LeMay had two troop carrier groups in Germany working for him, about 100 C-47 twin-engine aircraft. The other group was Air Transport Command, and this was a worldwide, can best be viewed as a worldwide airline, military airline for hauling freight and passengers. And it tried to run regular routes, it ran global routes, it ran a pretty much an identifiable schedule, and it could carry a huge amount of material. Just before the Berlin airlift, it was consolidated with Naval Air Transport Service to become MATS, Military Air Transport Service, the first of the great joint commands. And this was just about 3 months before the airlift began. So LeMay had two troop carrier groups ready to go, and he turned them almost automatically. As I've said, the blockade was essentially established on June 24th, but on June 22nd, LeMay wrote back to the Pentagon saying, "Today I have devoted all of the airlift at my disposal to supporting Berlin, and this will continue as long as the Soviet blockade continues." So they were already in operation before essentially the blockade really began. However, we date the Berlin airlift formally from June 26th, 2 days afterwards, because on that date, Clay and LeMay went back to the United States by message requesting C-54 four-engine aircraft, 4 squadrons of them. And the decision made on June 27th was to send those aircraft, and they will become the backbone ultimately of the Berlin airlift. On the June 29th, LeMay appointed General Joe Smith, who was a bomber expert, temporary commander of the Berlin airlift. At this point, it was a very disorganized organization, just beginning to get its feet going. And Smith, in the 2 to 3 weeks he was in command, managed to turn it on to a pretty reasonably professional level. He had the advantage, Gail Halverson reminded me, of these were experienced pilots that were in USAFE at the time. A lot of them were bomber pilots, some were transport pilots, but they were very, very experienced people with a lot of hours at the controls thanks to the war. Many of Joe Smith's decisions, that thing will work when I don't want it to, and you got to hold your tongue right. Yeah. Joe Smith was temporary commander of the airlift. 2 weeks later, the permanent commander arrived, and that was General William Tunner. And Tunner was the incisive air transportation genius who turned the Berlin airlift into what it ultimately became. He was an extremely hardworking individual. He drove his staff unmercifully. They worked 14, 16, 18 hours a day, and he worked more hours than they did. He was smart, had a photographic memory, was articulate, and was very highly opinionated about the importance of air transport. He was, in my terms, America's preeminent air transport specialist. And LeMay said of him, getting Tunner in was like getting John Ringling to get the circus in operation. The principal airfield in Berlin, in the American sector, was Tempelhof. You can always tell Tempelhof because of the huge circle of buildings here. At this point, you can see it has one runway down the middle. Ultimately, they will build 2 more, mostly by hand, using German citizens will come out and work by hand to increase the capacity of this particular airport. There were one other airport in the British zone was Gatow. Let's see how this works. Yeah, this is C-47s at Tempelhof, and you can see again they're parked in slight curve there. At this point, you can see the trucks unloading. The picture speaks to the immaculate organization that Tunner attempted to establish. There we go. C-54. LeMay and Clay realized that the C-47s, with their 3-ton cargo capacity, were not going to solve the problem. They had to get a lot more tonnage in. And the C-54 was a long-range 4-engine, again developed from an airliner, the DC-4, but a military transport capable of carrying 10 tons of cargo. And the first thing that Clay and LeMay did was request and get permission from the United States for the C-54s to be brought over. 4 squadrons were brought over initially. They were given just almost a day or 2 notice to get ready to come over. They were told they were only going to be gone a few days. That turned into weeks, then months, and many of them didn't get back until 1949. There's a story, one of the squadrons, the Hawaii squadron, flew out of Hawaii, on its way to Germany, had to stop at San Francisco, across the United States, across the Atlantic, so on. And as they flew out of Hawaii and towards San Francisco, they passed over a Army troop ship coming out to Hawaii that was carrying their families out to them in Honolulu. But, I'm not going to comment on their comments when they arrived in Honolulu. Gatow was the British base, and I tend to forget, I did this morning, I tend to forget to emphasize how important the British the British contribution was. Their operation, ours was called Operation Victuals. Theirs was Operation Plain Fare, which was a play on words with airplane fare. They actually suggested the idea of an airlift. They found Brian Robertson, the field marshal who was the British military governor in Germany, came in on about the 25th and found Clay planning a armed convoy, running an armed convoy down the Autobahn to take over and repair, quote unquote, the bridge, and had a hissy fit. British will not support you. We will not support you. This risks war. The French won't support you. This risks war. And he said, by the way, my people think that we might be able to provide enough material to buy some time by using airlift. Clay then got on the phone and went back to called back to the United States, talked to Secretary Royal of the Army and Omar Bradley, the Chief of Staff, and they had a hissy fit as well. This risked war. We do not have the capability of fighting the Soviets. And at this point, Clay and LeMay then kind of turned over and said, we're going to have to try some kind of airlift. The airlift, I stress again, is already operating. There's already some C-47s flying a few tons in each day out of these two 60th and 61st Troop Carrier Groups. But their decision to go back to the United States, and on Sunday, the 27th of June, the decision to send the C-54s means that we're going to make the airlift last longer. We're going to support it fully. It is not at this point the Berlin airlift. It is an airlift by time. We only are going to need a few weeks, maybe. Tonner thought he was coming out for about 2 weeks, 4 weeks when he arrived. This is going to buy time for our people to make a diplomatic effort without being pressured by the situation, by the Soviets. So it's an expedient, not a solution to the Berlin crisis. This is one of my favorite photographs of the airlift because it shows the regimentation that Tonner wanted to lay out. This is Selly in the British zone. These are C-54s out here. You see them nose to tail, organized, ready to go. Down here are more. They're in hard stands being worked on. There are some, you can't see them here, but there are some tails sticking out of buildings. Those are being maintained. Way on the other side over here, this first line is a line of trucks. This is the ready line. Each truck carries 10 tons of cargo. 10 tons is the cargo of one airplane. They are loaded with the heaviest stuff to the front, to the rear of the trailer, so that the heaviest stuff can be loaded first. Then they, way on the far side, those dark lines, that's the trains that are bringing supplies into Selly. This is the kind of organization that will make the Berlin airlift succeed. These are the trucks as they're being unloaded from the trains. These are Army trucks, and and they're the loading is done by displaced persons, Poles, Ukrainians, other people that have ended up as slave labor in Germany, and now after the war can't get back home. They were organized into companies. Here's the ready line. You can see the trucks in line. Again, 10 tons per truck, ready to load as soon as the aircraft are ready. And this is how they loaded the aircraft, by hand. In 15 months of the Berlin airlift, we delivered 2.3 million tons of food, supplies, coal, material to Berlin. And every pound of that 2.3 million tons went at some point on someone's back. It was a hand operation. This gives you a kind of picture of the intense human scale of the Berlin airlift. These, while the aircraft are loading, these are the pilots being briefed on their air routes, conditions, weather, etc. The aircraft are refueled. These are people working on top of the wings. Then, when they all come together, they line up and take off. And this was strictly regimented. If there was a technical hero of the Berlin airlift, it was ground control radar, GCA, ground control approach radar, excuse me. This enabled the aircraft to operate in very poor visual conditions. And it was not just equipment, it was a process, a human process, in which pilots had to have confidence in the men sitting in little bitty rooms telling them what to do, where they were. The pilots had to read their, my tongue is, there we go. The pilots had to, the radar operators had to read exactly where the aircraft were and guide the pilots up and down, left and right, coming into a land at any of the bases that could be completely socked in. I mean, you haven't lived until you've stared at a solid gray wall of fog on your windshield like this, and you're flying down a beam you can't see, listening to somebody's voice in your ear saying up, down, left, right, and watching your dials, and that's all you're seeing are the dials. The last thing you hear is the words something like take over and land visually, and you hope that that's going to part and you're going to see the runway below. I talked to an airman one time who did this. He was coming in, and he was told take over and land visually, and the fog cleared. He could see down below, and what he saw was a cemetery. And he said it scared him. They thought he was trying to tell them something. The runway at Tempelhof was just beyond a big cemetery. He did that 3 or 4 more times and got pretty used to it. And then one day he flew in visually. He could see everything, bright sunshine, great. He was going along staring at his dials and watching what he was doing, and he kind of looked over this way and suddenly realized people were looking down at him. He was landing, first time he realized he was landing between apartment buildings on both sides. This is what the 3 corridors looked like. They're 20 miles wide. There was a long one that ran from the American zone down here, about 180 miles up to Berlin. There's 3 bases in Berlin that made it complicated. Then you had, once they came in, they always went out the middle corridor, which was in the British zone. The British came down the northern corridor, and for a while they flew back up the northern corridor as well, separating themselves with altitude. But the idea was to get a particular pattern going like this. And if you missed a a landing, then early in the airlift you stacked one top aircraft after the other higher until you could bring them down. But this started to fail in August of 1948, and so a decision was made: if you miss the landing here, then you turn around and immediately come back down. You fly all the way back down to your base, and then they fit you back into the stream. And it kept it going in operation. And under ideal conditions, they were, for a while, capable of landing aircraft every 3 minutes in Berlin. The Soviets were appalled because apparently one of the American turning points was right over the top of their headquarters. And they thought the Americans were being insulting. I mean, after all, there was an airplane here disappearing, an airplane right above, and then a third one coming on immediately. And obviously this was done to insult us. The altitudes flown, initially we used a system of blocks, and the blocks essentially were X number of C-54s from Rhein-Main, followed by a block of C-47s from Wiesbaden, followed by, and so on, so on, so on. This was necessitated because the C-47 and the C-54 flew at different speeds, different cruising speeds. But once you could get, as we did in September 1948, to one particular aircraft with one speed, then you could pretty much fly them together. And they set up a pattern called, at the top, it's the ladder. The ladder is the first 5 airplanes, 3 minutes apart, 500 feet higher, going up to the top of aircraft, number 5. Then number 6 begins the ladder again, and it goes back up. Number 12 then goes back and continues on. And this is the way they deconflicted them. The biggest problem with the ladder was you landed at 2,000 feet. You had to come all the way down to the same level. And deconflicting number 5 and number 6 here, coming down like this, proved to be more difficult. So they took a look at it, and they went with what was called the bicycle chain. And the same number of C-54s, but there are 2 levels like this, 3 minutes apart, 500 different level. And once they went to that, then they had a pretty easy, I won't say easy, but a much better system, a little less complicated. Additionally, then you had aircraft flying out of Wiesbaden, aircraft flying out of Rhein-Main. Wiesbaden didn't have a lot of airplanes. It had much fewer airplanes, and it became easier to put them in charge of Rhein-Main, so that when Wiesbaden got an airplane ready, instead of waiting, they told Rhein-Main, and Rhein-Main fitted it into this chain. And at that point, by the spring of 1949, they were reasonably efficient for the time. These are the lights that were established on top. These are pure steel planking poles that were rigged and leading downward. They had a bunch of poles started real high and went low, leading you into the runway. And there's these huge lights on the top of this, giving extra visibility. And you can see there what kind of fog and what kind of visibility you had at times. Yep, there we go. This is the graveyard, the cemetery. You can see the big lights on poles here. And there are the apartments on, that's one side, then the other side. And here's an airplane coming down, and it's going to be below that apartment by the time it gets down towards the end. That's Tempelhof right there in the distance. And this is landing, the apartments and cemetery in the rear, and pure steel planking on the runways. Pure steel planking started breaking down. We had to build another couple of runways, and then we had to build a whole new base called Tegel, and I'll show you that in a second. These are the C-54s after they've landed and begun to unload. Unloading was done by German teams. This is the Germans taking the coal and putting them in trains for distribution throughout the city. You know, coal was a miserable, dirty, ugly cargo. It wasn't all fun and games. We lost some aircraft. We lost 31 men. You know, this is a C-47 that crashed in Berlin. We had to build another airport, that was Tegel, in the French zone, and we used some heavy equipment. These are big powered tractors. Oops. But most of it was by hand, was done by hand, and these are German civilians laboring to build the runways. You know. This was blockade breakers, what that says, and there's a pretty high morale. They did this not for very much money. They didn't get much money for it. They got a hot meal, and that counted for a lot in Berlin at that time. Yeah. Maintenance was a major concern, and they went to a global maintenance system. These were docks, wooden docks, built out in the open, which you can imagine working on aircraft out in the bad weather on these open docks. The individual I knew was a brand new airman maintenance type, came out of the school, was sent immediately to Germany, landed after dark, was sent out. He was told, take your toolkit and you go down and start working on those engines. You could just go down to the docks. And so he dutifully picked his stuff up and started down through this fog, and he couldn't see anything. As people loomed out of the fog, he kept asking where the water is. You know, that's the only type of dock he'd ever heard of. You know. Yeah. These, again, maintenance on the engines. But it was easier to do. You did some type of maintenance, very carefully controlled in Germany, but it was easier to do the more difficult maintenance, the 200-hour inspections, back in England. So they opened up a old base, built a brand new facility in England, and flew aircraft every 200 hours for major maintenance back to this facility. It was just easier and faster to use the speed of the airplane to get it to the point where maintenance could be done. 1,000-hour inspections were done in the United States. They flew the airplanes off the Berlin airlift all the way back to the United States at the end of 1,000 hours for depot level maintenance. You know, it was a global effort. It was easier not to repair engines at all. You know, you take the engines off the airplane, fly the engines back for repairs, put a new engine or a replacement engine on in Germany. Again, global airlift. This is Burton Wood, you know, and global maintenance. You know. That picture says it all. Tires, brakes, windshield wipers, spark plugs, thousands and thousands of parts had to be used, had to be available. Maintenance, the Berlin airlift was using an airplane that was not designed for that kind of work, and so they had to basically repair them quite often, replace parts quite often, a lot more often than they were ever expected to. In the fall, they went into German weather, which is some of the worst weather in Europe, some of the worst in the world. It's cold, rainy, foggy, snowy. You know, you could lose an airplane on the runway. The fog was so bad, and they had follow-me jeeps there with bright lights and so on to try and get people to get their airplanes to the places they were supposed to go. You know. But it worked. They managed to drive the amount up. November was almost the failure, but they got through it. And after November of 1948, then they increased tonnage each month. And in May, the Soviets basically gave up. They had originally set out to essentially blackmail the Allies. Their goal was not to kick us out of Berlin so much as it was to reverse decisions that were made in January of 1948 in London that were leading to a separate Western, independent, democratic Western Germany, and to a separate economic Germany, and something that the Soviets did not want. They accused us essentially of rebuilding Germany for a war of revenge against the Soviet Union. But in fact, all of their efforts failed, and the United States and the Allies continued to march towards a separate West Germany and towards the establishment of NATO, both of which were results of a lot of what went on in the Berlin airlift. Three happy guys celebrating victory, blockade lifted. The Navy celebrated also. They had 2 squadrons on the airlift. Blockade ends, airlift wins. I used to know Harry Emmel, the short pilot there. He flew the last official mission. The blockade ended on 12 May 1949, but we continued to fly missions until 30 September 1949 to build up supplies in Berlin in case the Soviets did this again. Another of my friends was the great cartoonist Jake Schufert. Humor was very important on the Berlin airlift, and Schufert was a talented artist that was discovered by Tunner and put to use, and he had a thing where he was developing developing cartoons. These are going to be a little off, it looks like. It said, basically, they're going into the weather shack. The weatherman has hung himself, and the pilot says, "Oh, looks like bad weather again." Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Jake was a wonderful man with a great sense of humor. Here all the pilots have gone to sleep. They're sacked out. And down at the bottom it says that, here we go. Let's bring it up. GCA to Big Willie 5449, very nice approach. You are now over the end of the runway, took over and land visually. So they're doing a great job of flying, and you can see GCA in the back right there. Oops. The thing here is I don't think, the guy is saying, I don't think that I don't think he's used to passenger flights yet. He's tying all the passenger down. On the other hand, the way I've flown lately, some of the airplanes, he might be very, very used to passengers, and I have it be sure. This is the secret to a successful airlift. Hello, Sally, I hear Fastbury is way ahead of you on tonnage today. And is that so, is the answer. Hello, Fastbury, I hear Sally is going wild on tonnage today, lots more than you. We'll see about that. And this is an airlift efficiency expert making his telephone calls, motivational work. Yeah. And one of my favorite cartoons, this is the flight surgeon's office, and he's saying, this is the new nose and throat specialist for the coal flyers, and pointing out again how miserable coal was as a cargo. Yeah. Finally, they went to all of the experts. This is a briefing on cold weather flying, and this is by the navigation briefing here. So they got the best expert they could find on cold weather flying. Yeah. Now for a few words on cold weather flying. Yeah. And finally, I have this one right here. This will revolutionize the follow me Jeep. So. And I'm not going to show any more photographs. These are of Gail Halverson, so he'll be talking with you in just a second. The Berlin airlift ended. I'm not going to give the exact figures. I have them in my book. You buy it and read it. But we flew about 277,000 sorties in 15 months, and we did about a little over 2.3 million tons delivery in that 15 months. And it was just a tremendous, intense operation. For the personal side of that, you have to have a veteran of the lift. I've been fortunate to talk to many of them, and we are doubly fortunate to have one of them here tonight. So thank you very much for being a great audience, and thank you up there. Wonderful. Yeah, please. Thanks again. Yeah.
I'd like to have the newest Berlin friend come to the stand. Ursula, would you come up? It's happening all the time. We ran into somebody just a few minutes ago. I met this young lady out in the hall. I'd like to have her tell you a little bit what it was really like in Berlin. Now I've got to really be careful what I say. She's here. Go ahead, Ursula. Give them a few words on what it was like.
Well, I saw in Saturday's paper that we would have this program here tonight. And this meant a lot to me because I could say like President Kennedy, who said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," but I'm the real McCoy. I was born there and raised there and lived there and went to school until the school children were evacuated due to all the bombings that were in Berlin. But I returned in 45 just before the Russians singled Berlin and nobody could get in and out, and we were in street wars. One day our street had German soldiers, the next day we had Russian tanks, and all that happened until the war was over, the 8th of May in 45. For 3 months, the Russians had free run of the city. There was no law until the Americans then took our sector where I lived. And since this is a very nice suburb of Berlin, Berlin-Dahlem, close to the Grunewald, it had some beautiful homes that hadn't been destroyed yet, which then the officers and their wives, and I knew General Clay and his wife, and she was a darling. The typists, the ladies in uniform, the WACs, were not bilingual. And so I heard on the American Forces Network radio, they were looking for people that spoke several languages and could type and could be interpreters, because after a while, some GIs wanted to marry German girls or vice versa. And the General Clay and the officers had to converse with the Burgermeister and the Oberbürgermeister of the American zone. And so they needed interpreters, and I worked for them from 45 till April of 49. When I had a chance to go to the United States, and I'm not a war bride, I had to become stateless. And so through the Americans, I was able to fly out of Tempelhof in one of those things, my very, very first flight, and it scared me to death. I had a special pass because I was the only civilian, and we watched these planes come in right over the rooftops of these houses. Some were bombed out, and some were still okay. Had holes in the roofs, and that's where we found a lot of the candy. I didn't live there, but I had friends that lived just 2 blocks from Tempelhof, and the children found that when they go up into the bombed out houses, or the roofs had holes in them, they were tile, clay tile, and through anti-aircraft, what goes up has got to come down, and so they had lots of holes, and that's where the candies and the chewing gum and a lot of things fell all around Tempelhof. I talked to the young people there and to find out, but they were called the raisin bombers, the Rosinenbomber. They didn't call them the candy bombers. Anyway, somehow you must have thrown chewing gum and boxes of raisins that might have got out of those little parachutes, and they just fell on the ground. And every time the children heard another plane come in, they were in the streets gathering up food, and everybody was hungry. It was wonderful. And when I left Tempelhof, we got onto those cargo planes. They had just taken great big gunny sacks out. We thought potatoes, but you said it was coal. They put benches on the side and no seat belts of any kind. And there were some soldiers sitting here and a couple of whacks at me, and they'd take off so steep, we just about slid off. I mean, it scared us to death. But I always made up my mind, if I ever find a pilot that came in to bring us food, I would hug him, and we did that downstairs.
Let's
didn't
do it
we?
again. Perfect. Beautiful, beautiful job. Thank you, Ursula. That was an extra bonus. Well, I'm certainly express gratitude to this fantastic museum and the people that run it. It's so immaculate, so beautiful in the exhibits, how they've got it arranged, and we're grateful for your invitation and for the way you honor the president's memory. We're grateful for that great president. I think I'm here because of him. He placed 60 B-29s, bombers on the runways in England, and when those Yak-3 fighters would buzz my airplane without shooting, I knew it was President Truman that made it possible, because he told Stalin, you shoot at those airplanes, you're going to have a bomb in Moscow with a big fire. So we voted for Truman all the time. It was great. Great president with great integrity. I'm honored, not for myself, but to represent the thousands of those on the Berlin airlift that made it possible. The British, French, and Americans, and within each country, the organizations. The Air Force didn't do it on the airlift alone. The Army, there wouldn't have been any stuff there to take to Berlin if it hadn't been for the Army and a lot of the security they provided. The Navy brought it over on the sea lift. So the Army, Navy, Air Force, it was a team effort. And as I mentioned before with our group, it wasn't the pilots in that team effort within the Air Force that were the most important. Most important were the aircraft mechanics, people on the ground who changed engines in a snowstorm, fingers freezing to the cylinder heads. They had no cover. There's too many airplanes to do it in the hangar. And so they'd have to change it out in the open field in the snowstorm at midnight. They were the people. There'd been no airplanes over Berlin if it hadn't been for the aircraft mechanics on the ground. And as Roger has mentioned, in November, 444 days required a radar approach to get the airplane on the ground. There were only 32 hours in the month of November where they could land visually. So these people made it work. The cooks and bakers, nobody had been anywhere. General Tunner said airlift ought to be as dull as water dripping on a stone, like a symphony. Everybody had to play their part. So let's play down the pilot bit and let the people know who really did the work, the guys in the trenches. Well, very quickly, let me screen some home movies. You got 7 minutes sleep, and I'll wake you up. Let's have this thing. We'll run it right through to the end right quick. I took an awful lot of movies on the airlift.
At the end of World War II,
most
Great
all of them used
Britain,
it.
France, the United States, and the Soviet Union divided Germany and its capital, Berlin, into 4 occupied zones. The 3 Western Allies decided to create a separate West German government in their zones. As a result of disagreements, the Soviets stopped deliveries of food, fuel, and other necessary supplies coming into the city. They intended to starve the people into submission and forced the Western Allies to surrender their position in Berlin. According to the Yalta Agreement, the Western powers had air access to Berlin through 3 air corridors. The southern corridor was used for aircraft from Rhein-Main and Wiesbaden. Aircraft from Celle, Fosburg, and British bases used the northern corridor to Berlin. All aircraft exited Berlin through the center corridor. This provided one-way traffic for all aircraft involved. The city of Berlin was divided into 4 sectors. Tempelhof was the air base in the American sector, Gatow in the British, and Tegel in the French sector. Tegel was built during the airlift by thousands of German laborers, 40% of which were women.
The movie's from 1948.
wie heißt der gerade?
Der Erde Grund lebt mich wie im Traum.
That's not me singing.
Ein verliebter Mond, wenn sich die späten
Beautiful airplanes laboring in the air with 10 tons of coal or medicine, food supplies for the over 2 million people in Berlin to keep them free.
I'll never forget that first flight to Berlin. The city looked like a moonscape. How could 2 million people live in a place like this? I couldn't wait to take in that 20,000 pounds of flour and see the reaction. We had freedom and we had food. The Berliners needed both. From that day on, that first flight, we were on the same page.
We didn't know what happened to it. Unloaded the airplane, some white things waving, and their mouths were going up and down. And I knew that they'd caught all 3 parachutes, and they all had shared with others that didn't get it. Those kids were happy.
And now it's wintertime and there's snow and ice on the
You
airplanes.
raise that any?
The airlift's still going on.
Possible to raise that any? I guess
We
you
had
could.
long-range radar come into Berlin, or we'd have failed to supply the great Berliners. Taking off on instruments. It's a marvel we didn't crash with that ice. Starting up engines, we understand it's clear to go now. We'll watch the fog.
Düsteren Novembertagen, wo Nebel wie Watte das Land überzieht.
We'll watch the fog up ahead now. You'll see an airplane coming through the fog. Between the buildings, below the buildings, the new runway was lined up in a graveyard, and the approach was lower than the buildings, and often you wouldn't see anything till a red light was above you, and you know the building was passing you on the right.
Just happened to be shooting some film when that
They would
guy
rush
came
out on
between the buildings,
field
like we always
planking
did.
after an airplane would land.
This is the first runway, the temporary runway, pure steel planking. Beat it to death, had to land short. Hitler didn't make the runway long enough. So at the beginning, it was touch and go. We could finish the new runway, asphalt, before this one's completely unusable. The women had come out after every airplane and sit on a crowbar, raise it up, put tar and sand under it. They'd blow a horn and they'd run off the runway and the airplane would ran. As soon as the airplane passed, they'd get back on the runway.
Try to support this pure steel plank. It was very slippery when it rained. Very slick, and several ran off the end of the runway. One burned. I think we might have seen the cop. You can see as we take off, you can see the hulk of the burned airplane on the end of the runway.
There's the burned out plane landed the day before I landed there.
The unveiling ceremony of the U.S. Postal Service
1998
was
we flew the
history in its own
airplane
right,
across the Atlantic.
as it was the first time an American stamp had been unveiled outside the United States. Retired Colonel Gail Halverson made the flight to Berlin's Tempelhof Airport, one of the historic airlift sites. Following the unveiling, a commemorative cancellation took place.
If all the Berlin airlift had done was supply a city with food and coal for a year, that in itself would have gone down in history. But as we all know, the airlift did much more than that. It also delivered food for the spirit, hope that someday all the citizens of Germany would.
Okay. Thank you. Very quickly then, during the airlift with the kids, my experience with them, I was the barbed wire fence that surrounded Tempelhof, and between the bombed out buildings and the barbed wire fence was a big open place, about 200 yards. And then I was standing inside the barbed wire, shooting pictures of airplanes landing, coming over my head. And I was there for about an hour talking to kids 8 to 14 years of age. And all that time they were very friendly to me, the uniform that was bombing them 3 years before. And then I realized that the Jeep I had waiting to take me around the city wouldn't wait long. So I started to run away to the Jeep, and a little voice said, "These kids are really different, how come?" And it didn't take me long to figure that out. These children had no chocolate for months, no gum, barely enough to eat for months. And not one of them, during that hour they had me stopped, would put out their hand and say, you know, got any chocolate? During the war and after the war, I flew in foreign countries where the kids had chocolate. Not a lot, but they had some. But even though they had it, they would chase you down the street as you walked in an American uniform, and some of you here might have had that experience yourself. Be obnoxious and want American chocolate. We'd always give them stuff anyway, but these kids would be obnoxious. But the Berlin children, with nothing in the most dear thing to their heart, was some chocolate. And yet, not one of them at 30 would be a beggar for something so extravagant. They're so grateful for flour to be free. They wouldn't ask for something more than freedom. And when I realized what that silent gratitude meant, boy, I was just overcome. And I wanted to give them something, hoped I had something. All I had was 2 sticks of double mint gum. I said, get out of here. You're going to have bloody noses. Don't do it. Maybe we can help them some other way. Well, I just was there on a fluke. I should have been in bed in Rhine-Main. You couldn't come back to the fence. You couldn't even go in the terminal building then. But I'd hitchhike back when I was supposed to be asleep to get these pictures. So I thought, well, just the last second, I said, we'll give them 2 sticks of gum. And that's the only reason I'm here right now, is for 2 sticks of gum. I broke it in half, 4 pieces through the barbed wire. The kids that got the half a stick looked like they just got $1,000. And those that didn't came in, and I thought, oh boy, here comes the fight. But there were girls in the mix, and the boys were real kind to them. They didn't push them out of the way. But they asked for something. They wanted a piece of the wrapper. And they didn't fight for it, but they just asked for the wrapper. And the kids with the half a stick carefully tore off the outer wrapper and the tin foil and passed the pieces to the kids that didn't get any gum. And when I saw that, I just couldn't believe it. But then the children with a piece of paper would put it up to their nose and smell it and smell it, and their eyes would get big. And I just stood there dumbfounded. I just came out of the States. I couldn't believe what I saw. And I said, boy, I got to do something for them. And I couldn't come back to the fence. As I said, I'd be flying 24 hours without sleep. I'd take my sleep time to be there. Couldn't leave the airplane when we came in to unload it. Had to stay right there, and the last sack's off. You're gone back for more. I couldn't see him again. And then an airplane came over my head and landed right behind me, and I thought, wow, I could drop it out of the airplane, and the kids would have it tomorrow. And the same kids that showed that silent gratitude that was so powerful to me. And then the red light came on and said, look, you know, you got to have permission for that. You can't do stuff like that without permission. And I rationalized and said, whole airlift's not according to Hoyle anyway. What's a few sticks of gum? Starving too many people? That's how you get in trouble. So I said, found myself saying to the kids, come back here tomorrow. Stand in that open place. And when I come over your head, if you'll share it, I'll drop enough out of the airplanes for all of you to have some stuff. And boy, they went crazy. Jawohl, jawohl, jawohl. And they'd do it. And they'd share it. Then they want to know how they know the airplane. So every 5 minutes, there's an airplane coming overhead. If you don't come till late in the day, we'll be cross-eyed. We won't be able to see anything, let alone a little package of gum or chocolate. We got to know what your airplane's like. The airplanes came from Alaska. They had red tails and red wings. They crashed in the snow. You'd find them. The Hawaiian airplanes had palm trees and pineapples, and we flew whatever airplane was loaded to go. And so I said, I don't know. But then I got the idea. I said, when I come over the airfield the first time, if the weather's good, I'll wiggle the wings. And when you see those wings wiggle on that 4-engine airplane, that's got the stuff. Just watch that one. And boy, they said, get out of here. Let's start this thing. Well, I couldn't get much gum and candy. We were rationing each week. I just had a small amount of chocolate and gum. Went to my co-pilot and engineer. Said, give me your ration. What are you going to do with it? You are? You got permission? No. You're going to get us in trouble. I said, give me a ration. I promised the kids I'd give it to them tomorrow. And they were good guys. They had a double handful of chocolate bars, gum. Smell that. I couldn't wait to get back to Berlin. Now, holy cow, that's heavy. Hit them in the head with that going 110 miles an hour will make the wrong impression. So I'm no Einstein, but I figured out a solution, just like a kid in a rock trip on a handkerchief. I broke it up into thirds, put 3 handkerchiefs on it so they could see it. If they lost one, they wouldn't lose it all. Went back to Berlin. It's midnight, so nobody there, of course. Next day, just before noon, came in, clear day, looked down there, and there's those 30 kids right in the middle of the open place. They hadn't told another soul. Wiggled the wings and Mayday celebration. Man, they just exploded. I can still see their arms stuck up the sky coming over that bombed out building. Right behind the pilot's seat in the 54 is a flare chute, emergency flare chute, so that at night, if you're going to crash, you put a flare out, lights up the countryside, you miss the farmer's house and land his cornfield. So it's an emergency exit out of the airplane right behind the pilot. So Sergeant Elkins, I said, when I tell you, push it out the flare chute. We were both getting ready to land the airplane, pilot and co-pilot. So came over the kids, pushed it out, didn't know what happened, might have pulled it over the barbed wire to the runway, worried about that, but more worried if the pilots lined up to take off had seen that parachutes come out, and take my tail number and report me. Well, anyway, taxied out to take off after unloading 20,000 pounds of flour, and there were 3 parachutes waving through the barbed wire at all the airplanes, and their mouths were going up and down. I said, holy cow, I wish they wouldn't do that. Well, every day they were out there, bigger crowd. The word got around a little bit, their cousins started to join them. New weekly ration. Looked at each other once more, yeah, we did it again. 3 weeks we did it. And then the weather in West Germany was on the deck. We only had enough fuel to fly to Berlin and back out to West Germany and hold for 20 minutes. So weatherman's supposed to come by the airplane. I ran into base ops to see what the weather was going to be, and they're on a planning table, map table, with a huge stack of mail. And I wondered why that was going to waste. My girlfriend hadn't written me for 2 weeks, and this mail was in Berlin. I didn't expect no letter there. So I looked up at it, and I looked at the address that says to Uncle Wiggly Wings, Tempelhof, base operation. The Schokoladenflieger. I said, holy cow, we're in trouble. So I forgot about the weather. I ended up in Oberhoffenpfaff in Bavaria that night with about 10 minutes of gas left. But I was more worried about that stack of mail than I was the gas. Well, we got back on the regular schedule. The kids were out there more all the time. We said, no more of this. 2 weeks went by. And then finally we looked at each other and said, well, you know, you used your rations. We didn't have time. We had 2 weeks of ration. And then I said those fateful words you've said sometimes before you got in trouble. Once more and that's all. Well, we said once more and that's all. 6 parachutes over Berlin, wiggled the wings, Mayday celebration. Said, that's it, we're through. Well, we weren't quite through. Next day came back from Berlin to Rhein-Main. An officer came steaming on the airplane. Who's flying this airplane, he said. And my good buddy's pointing at me, he said, he is, why? He said, Colonel Hahn wants to see you right now. I said, what for? He'll tell you. Colonel Hahn, Halverson, what you been doing? Well, I said, I've been flying like mad, sir. I'm not stupid, he said. What else have you been doing? And then I knew he knew. For 15 minutes, I thought I was going to be court-martialed. Pulled out a newspaper, threw it on the counter. There was an article. Almost hit a German newspaper guy in the head of the candy bar in Berlin the day before. And he got it all over the world. General Tunner called him up. Colonel Hahn, what are you doing dropping parachutes over Berlin? Hahn to Tunner. General, we're not dropping parachutes over Berlin. Colonel, you better find out what's going on in your outfit. Clunk. Well, from that lesson I've learned in business that you keep your boss informed. Keep your boss informed. Don't let your boss's boss find out something your boss doesn't know. That's a 101 in business. So General Tunner said, hey, let him keep doing. Colonel Hahn was a good guy. I just felt bad about making him look bad, but he's a great guy and it went crazy. My buddies gave me their ration. We tied it up. The thing got out of control. Went back to the States. The American confectioneer says, we'll send you all the stuff free, all that stuff you can use free. Just tell us where to send it. Well, he sent 6,000 pounds of chocolate by boat and rail to Rhein-Main early in December 1948. my buddies in the squadron were all dropping it by then. We took 100 pounds extra. You just put on an extra 100 pounds overload of candy boxes, took it to Berlin. Just for security, we found a jailhouse that wasn't being used very well, people too busy, and we stashed it in the jailhouse till the day before Christmas, and the military and the youth in Berlin had a big party, not at night because there's no lights for that. Letters came pouring in like crazy. A little boy, Peter Zimmerman, said, look, I'm 9 years old. My legs are too short. I'm not running as fast as the other kids. Almost got one today. Bigger kid beat me to it. He made me a parachute, strings are right length, everything, and a map. And he said, when you take off, the tower let me. By that time, the secretaries were answering the mail. We couldn't type the parachutes or answer the mail. We didn't have time. So he says, when you take off out of Tempelhof, you come down the Spray River, second bridge, turn right 1 block, live in the bombed out house in the corner. I'll be in the backyard every day at 2 o'clock, drop it there. Well, pilots like to buzz. So I'd buzz all over town making special deliveries. But I had trouble with Peter. I couldn't hit Peter. And finally he said, look, he said, I'm gonna build a fire. And there's be a lot of smoke, drop it upwind. Aerodynamicist in Bud, 9-year-old kid. I saw a fire once and dropped it. Then I got a letter. He said, look, he said, you're a pilot? He said, I gave you a map. How did you guys win the war anyway? Well, I gave up on Peter. I took a big patch of gum and candy and took it to Berlin and mailed it to him in the Berlin mail. You couldn't mail it across East Germany, but you get it to Berlin, you could mail it in the city mail. He needed a pair of shoes. His dad and mom were killed during the bombing of Berlin, and he needed some shoes bad. He was living with an uncle. And he wanted to be adopted. He wanted to be an American, and he was. He was adopted by a German family in Palm, Pennsylvania. He must have been killed in an accident of some kind about 20 years ago. I lost track of him. A little girl wrote, Mercedes. She said, you're causing us a terrible problem. So we live right by the airfield in an apartment house, and you're scaring our chickens. We got a bunch of white chickens, and they think you're a chicken hawk, and they come over the place, and they run in the coop. They're losing their feathers, and no more eggs. But the last paragraph is a payoff. So when you see the white chickens, drop it there. Says, I don't care if it scares them. Well, by that time, we were getting all kinds of stuff. I told all the buddies in the squadron, bomb the approach. Bomb the approach. We bombed the approach, and none of us hit Mercedes. So I took a big patch of gum and candy to Berlin and gave it to Mercedes. In 1970, because of 2 sticks of gum in 1948, I was assigned, pulled out of the space program, sent to Berlin as the commander at Tempelhof for 4 years for 2 sticks of gum. Talk about little decisions changing your life. When I landed there, the newspaper was full of candy bomber bags. The new commander at Tempelhof, invitations. Everybody that caught a parachute in 1948 wanted me to come to their house for dinner. We'd eaten free for 4 years, but we could not accept the assignments. As commander at Tempelhof, I was out every night. The crisis of Vietnam going on. We had bombings in Berlin. The threat to communists was just as strong as ever to take over West Berlin. And I was out every night, official functions, and weekends 2 or 3 times a night. It was a very busy assignment, and I wasn't able to accept the invitations. But one kept coming. 1970, 1971, 1972. Holy cow, I said, we'd better accept this one. I canceled some invitation one Wednesday night. We went out to this apartment house and rang the clinger. Down came a lady and a husband and 2 boys. I had 2 boys, same age. Took us upstairs to the apartment. Didn't say a thing who they were. Opened the china cabinet. She handed me a letter. Said, read this. I looked at the address and the telephone number. The date. It was November 1948. I said, well, I know what this is about. I opened the letter and I didn't. It said, dear Mercedes, can't find your white chickens, but I hope this is all right. She said, you silly pilot, I'm Mercedes. Step over here 5 steps, and I'll show you where the chickens were. Well, just the last 3 weeks, I've been with Mercedes almost every day. I've stayed in that same apartment house 35 times since 1972. They've come to Utah. We set up with Peter, her husband, who's a science teacher. Teachers, we got great teachers down here in front. Those of you in the back don't know it. Super teachers. And he's a science teacher in a big high school, and he was a German teacher in Utah, set up an exchange program, an airlift of high school students in 1980 for years. Just adopted reunification from kids in West Berlin going to Utah and Utah kids going there for 2 sticks of gum. Well, very quickly, I want to close. I think that it's important in life that if you have fulfillment, the only way I've got genuine fulfillment is when I help somebody else, and especially when you help somebody that's been an enemy. So service before self. Gratitude opens the communication channel between people and knocks down the wall that prevents the synergy of knowledge of two people being pooled to 2 + 2 = 6. And gratitude is that thing. If you're not grateful, if you say, give me all the time, that wall's there. If you demand to know what's in it before I do it, you're blocking off all the opportunities that might come your way. These kind of things are things that I learned. The bottom line is hope, too. Without hope, it's difficult in life to cope. In today's world, you have to have hope. We all have to have hope. We have hope in the future of our students and the kids that are coming up. You know, in 1998, as you saw that airplane, we flew it back Berlin, Great Britain, France, Luxembourg, Berlin twice. As Berliners came through the airplane, we could spot everyone that had been in the blockade. Tears, moist eyes in every case, thanking everybody for their freedom, how important it was. One man came up to me and said, I'm 60 years old. 50 years ago, I was going to school. The clouds were very low, and the rain was coming down. I knew the airplanes were landing. I could hear them. I couldn't see any landing or taking off. And suddenly, out of the cloud came a parachute with a fresh Hershey candy bar. It landed right at my feet. I was astounded. I knew it was happening, but I didn't think it happened to me. It took me a week to eat that candy bar. I hid it day and night. He said, looking far off though, I can live on thin rations, but not without hope. Without hope, he said, the soul dies. We need that hope. Hope today is happening in Iraq. It's happening in Afghanistan. It's happening around the world. The Air Mobility Command that has responsibility for all the military transport around the world takes off or lands every 90 seconds, day and night, right now around the world on missions of humanitarian support and support of those who fight for our freedom. That hope is the signature of the American flag on the tail. It comes into earthquake areas, whether they're former enemies or current enemies or whatever. We don't differentiate. Tsunamis, cyclones, you name it, we're there. And in support of the troops that defend our freedom, hope is essential in the human equation in coping with the challenges we have in life. And the hope is for freedom to choose, for freedom to make decisions on our own. We all want to do that, no matter what color we are or what side of the frontier we're born on. It's innate in human nature. I've got 24 grandkids and 10 great-grandkids and seen a lot of 2-year-olds. And every one of them, sometime or another, said, I do it myself when you try to do it for them. I do it myself. That's innate in the human psyche. And ours comes from the Constitution. Sam Adams was a great debater in those times, the father of the American Revolution, Boston Tea Party guy, debater. Before the schism got too great between the king's men and those for freedom, he was in a debate session. And looking at the king's men in the debate, he said words something like this. If you love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude more than the animated contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsel, nor your arms. Stoop down and lick the hands of he that feeds you. And may your posterity forget that ye were ever our countrymen. People like that, and those Nathan Hales and Patrick Henrys since that time, and those who have given their lives for our freedom. Jesus Christ said, greater love than this hath no man. And he laid down his life for a friend. 31 of my Air Force buddies and 39 of my British comrades gave their lives for an enemy, the Germans, who had become a friend. I'm grateful for those patriots that made it possible for us to drink water from wells we haven't dug. We warm ourselves by fires we haven't built. We have azure skies of blue, unmarked by the contrails of enemy aircraft. And our rolling fields of grain unmarked by the tank treads of enemy tanks. We harbor friendly ships in our harbors. And we're grateful for them. And at this moment, as we speak in our comfort, God bless those who defend our freedom today, the freedom of others, that they might have a right to choose. God bless you as you go about your work here, and especially these wonderful teachers that serve before self, that give money of their resources, where the budget won't cover it, and their hours beyond their contracts, to help those new patriots coming up today to serve our country. And God bless the United States of America.